Let me just and let's do that. There we go. Much better. Hey there everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, helping you decide, is that worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? So let's decide. As you can see, my dog's getting used to being in here, because she knows when I start talking, I'm going to slap that, so she has to get up and stare at me, like she's doing now. She knows I'm talking about her. You can see it in her eyes. Today's book is Melancholy Magic, written by Millie Thorne. Today's book is Melancholy Magic, a para-cozy mystery novel that was written by Millie Thorne, a not-so-secret pen name of a U.S. best-selling romance author. This book was published on April 12, 2022, making it the most recent book that I have reviewed on this channel, which, considering the amount of books I've read that are more recent, that's creating a disturbing trend, because the more recent the book is, the less I seem to like it. Considering its young age and relative obscurity, there's not much about this book in its background or anything to really talk about, so I'm mostly going to move on to the ratings card, and here you go. Way higher than it should be, but we'll move on. And where do we always start? The cover. I made it no secret in my TBR that I think the cover is awful. Like, that was one of the points of my TBR, that I knew this book was going to be bad because of the cover. It's got that cheaply made quality to its actual material, plus the fact that it's cheaply photoshopped everything on top of it with no attempt to blend anything together or even hint at what the book is really about. I mean, you got who is supposed to be our stand-in for Briley Scott, our main character, just right here in front. Her face is really white, but for some reason the rest of her arms are like super dark, like she's had a serious tan. But her face is so white, it's like, is she just like sticking her hands outside the window, letting them tan up? Then you got who's supposed to be Elmer, our basset hound, next to her. Again, cheaply photoshopped in. He's just kind of slapped in there. You can even kind of see his outline conflicting with the background a little bit, where they didn't quite blend it well. You get the manner behind that Briley has inherited over the course of this, but once more, it's just something they found online and slapped on, because that's not a good representation of the manner that is described in the book, for a number of reasons. The number one being this only has just a good example. The manor in the book has 3 stories. This manor has 2. And you know what? Maybe I misread that. Maybe it was counting the attic as one of its 3rd floor. So, you know what? I'll skip past that. Let's move on to the surrounding area. Bunch of grass with badly photoshopped in rose bushes that are bright pink. I can't really say anything. I mean, the area around the manor isn't terribly described, so it could fit for all I know. But let's go on to this little area right here. This is one of the biggest issues I had, because it's such a tonal disconnect from what the book is promising. The book is promising a para-cozy mystery. For those of you who don't know, it is promising a cozy mystery with paranormal elements. And nothing about this cover says that. In fact, this is the cover of a romance novel, if anything. To be fair, our author is a romance novelist, so this would be the kind of cover she's accustomed to making if she had a hand in it. However, the reason I'm so hard on this cover is, in my research, I actually found that there was a cover before or after this. I think it was before. But the cover that I saw looking up online is this one. And while don't get me wrong, it still has a lot of issues with it. This one at least promises some kind of paranormal mystery. It lends to the tone of the kind of genre this book would be. There's a sense of mystery in this cover, unlike this one, which is just romance. Seriously, you were to erase Elmer and just put in Ander, that there would be no differentiating this from a Harlequin romance novel. But I've ranted about the cover long enough. Let's move on to the synopsis. Now, for those of you who read my TBR, I keep saying that. I've noticed I've been saying that a couple times in my videos where I say read instead of watched. But for those of you who watched my TBR, you know that I read the synopsis out loud from the back. And the sentence structure on that was not very promising. But it could have, because like the subject of one line made it seem like that she was becoming like a slave owner. Wow. Just the sentence structure later on made me... Ugh. But basically, if you want to see that, watch the TBR. But a quick synopsis of this book is basically, after her father dies, Briley Scott gets a call from her Aunt Gwendolyn in a place known as Reverie Falls, a small town in the U.S., where she wants to reconnect, an aunt she never knew she had. However, having lost everything upon her father's death due to his massive debt to the banks, she decides to go check it out, where she finds out that her Aunt Gwendolyn is gifting her a manor and a hardware store, just like she ran with her dad back home. But also, she's a witch. Anyways, as time goes on, she grows closer with some of the town's inhabitants, Aunt Gwendolyn and a diner chef named Ander the most, actually really the only ones, as she tries to fix up the manor and the hardware store, making them both a place to live and a place to do business. Someone begins to break into her manor, stealing things for seemingly odds and ends, doorknobs, a mantelpiece, small things like that. After calling the sheriff, and realizing he's basically an incompetent buffoon, she decides that she's got to solve it herself, kind of. So I'm going to have to go into the review from here, because I've been trying very hard not to start a rant in the synopsis, just to get you guys the synopsis. But this book is not good. I'm sorry, this book is not good. I honestly was shocked when I looked it up and found out that it had a 4.5 rating on Goodreads. Basically, according to Goodreads, this book is better than this book. Yeah, doesn't make much sense, does it? But in fairness, that's because so few people have probably read and actually felt the need to go review that book. So I'm not... That's more for dramatic purposes here. Please don't type down below being like, well, density population of the review section actually inherits that. Yeah, I get it. It's for a joke, guys. Calm down. Honestly, this book was bafflingly bad. I'm not even joking. It was bad in ways that I'm like, there's no way it should be this bad. Especially with an author who's supposedly experienced and has made it to the best-selling list. Well, to be fair, less competent authors have made it onto that list as well, and with books that are atrocious. But I almost had less fun reading this than I did something like Night Flight. But there were clear elements to this book that worked. The romance between Briley Scott and Ander, the diner chef, is... I'm not going to say it was great, but it was at least good. At least in comparison to some of the other stories I read. Like, Not That Complicated, where the entire appeal of the romance was physical. And the characters of Briley, Ander, and Gwen had clear elements to them that hinted that they were decent characters. There were things that were left unanswered that, were kind of interested. Like, Ander has a very clear, rocky relationship with his sister to the point that just mentioning her sours his mood. Briley has some stuff in her background, like she hasn't quite gotten over the death of her father, and, she's clearly handy, and, there's little elements here and there. There's also Aunt Gwen, who has a lot of interesting things about her. The tragic story of her past, as well as the reasons why she can't really bear to use this manor or hardware store anymore, despite the fact that she legally owned it, but it wasn't actually inherited from a family, but rather her friend Rose. But she also has a quirky witch behavior that makes her interactions relatively fun to deal with. But apart from all of that, this book just isn't good. It really isn't. The paranormal elements are so so extraneous from the plot that they might as well not be there. And I'm talking everything from the fact that the manor that Briley inherits is its own sentient being, to the fact that Briley herself has empathetic powers and the ability to detect when someone's lying because they make her itch whenever they tell her a lie. The book is almost a textbook definition of meandering on a story. You want to know when Briley Scott, our titular hero, the one the series is named after, finally decides to actually investigate the mystery in this para-cozy mystery novel. Do you want to know when? I'll give you a guess. 5 seconds. You guys get 5 seconds. Comment down below. There's 251 pages in this book and 24 chapters. Comment down below either the chapter or the page you think this mystery starts on. 5 seconds. Go ahead. Alright, pencils down. It was a little longer than 5 seconds, but who guessed page 141 on chapter 14? Yeah, that's when Briley Scott finally makes the decision. I'm going to investigate this mystery that has been plaguing me for over 100 pages on this book. More than halfway through the book. It is not more than halfway through the book that our main character in a mystery novel decides to investigate the mystery. At least with Not That Complicated, the mystery was never supposed to be investigated. This one, that was a promised part of it. And this isn't like The Murder in the Orient Express, which takes about 74 pages to get to the actual crime and investigation of the mystery. Because the 74 pages of The Murder of the Orient Express is used to set up evidence and clues of the crime. It's meant to set up the investigation and see if you, as an audience member, are paying enough attention to notice those small little quirks as the investigation gets into full swing, as well as providing crucial clues that end up resulting in the solving of the investigation. This is just 141 pages of meandering, of pointless. Briley fixes up the hardware store. Briley eats at the diner. Briley flirts with Ander. Briley goes home. Briley realizes someone is breaking into her house again. Briley goes to fix up the hardware store. Briley goes to eat in the diner. That is what that book is up until that point. She even says she's going to investigate it before that, but never does. Ugh. And it's even more offensive because the guy breaking into her house is doing it while he knows she's there, and it's actively making her quality of life worse because she's under constant stress, and she's been sleeping in her minivan for nearly a month before she finally decides, I gotta find out he's breaking into my house so I can stop him. And I want to note, at that point, she does have a list of suspects who might be breaking into the house. She has people who it might be, and she has powers that can tell when someone is lying to her. But honestly, that kind of gets into my next main point. Briley Scott is just a terrible sleuth. She is not a character who should be a sleuth in the slightest. At best, she is the side character the sleuth has to explain everything to. She is screamingly bad at putting things together. She's one of those people who sees one of those Facebook riddles. You know the one, the super easy one that makes you sit back and think, how is that a challenge? It's so obvious what it is. And it's just absolutely stumped. Has no idea what it means. She cannot put together even the most basic of evidence. Even when every single bit of that evidence points to a single conclusion. A bit of a spoiler. Well, I say it's a spoiler, but I figured it out before the book even reached the halfway point, so it's seriously obvious. I'm not even joking. It's super obvious. But also consider this from this point on. Blanket spoiler review from here on out, because there's no way I can talk about this book the way I want to without spoiling something. So if for some godforsaken reason you watch this review and think, oh, I want to go read that book, but I still want to be surprised, stop here, I guess? Or skip to conclusion down below? Yeah, spoiler alert from here on out. Here's my example of how bad Briley Scott is at putting together evidence. She cannot figure out that her Aunt Gwen and Rose, the woman who Manor and Hardware Store actually was and was given to Aunt Gwen, who Aunt Gwen then gave to Briley, she cannot figure out what their relationship actually was. She has no idea that despite everything told to us through narrative and other people, that Gwen and Rose were a closeted lesbian couple. It's not even hard to figure out. I had it figured out by page 50. But hear me out. Here's this. She has all of this evidence and still doesn't know. Every time they bring up Rose or visit one of Rose's old places, Aunt Gwen feels such a deep sense of loss that Briley's empathetic powers are threatened to be overwhelmed by it, even though she does her best to suppress them at this point. 2. Rose left everything to Aunt Gwen in her will upon her death. Even over her sister Joan, who is implied to be a bit of a bad person, but Rose still loved, and she is super upset that she has nothing of her sisters to remember her by. 3. Aunt Gwen and Rose lived together in the manor. 4. Rose purposely planted blueberry bushes around their house after finding out they were Aunt Gwen's favorite, and made it a point to care for them very carefully, just so that Gwen can have blueberries. 5. There's one room in the house that Aunt Gwen tells Briley to stay out of, that it was Rose's room and that no one is allowed to be in there. I'm sorry, I'm just saying, it's so screamingly obvious that these two were a lesbian couple that I was literally screaming at Briley. I was literally at this point like, ah! When Briley hears another fact that changes how she saw the relationship and was like, Aunt Gwen didn't tell me that. What else isn't she telling me? What was really her relationship with Rose? It's like, girl, oh my god. You are a witch with empathetic powers. You literally have magical powers that tells you what people are feeling. How have you not figured this out? Even if Briley wasn't a terrible sleuth, this book would just still be bad, mystery-wise in general. In addition to the massive delay that is caused before they actually decide to actively investigate the crime, of which I will remind you, Briley is the victim of the crime that they're delaying investigating, the book itself doesn't even feel interested in telling the mystery. And you know what? That's fine. If the book wanted to be a romance between, this witch returning home, discovering her witch powers, but also romancing the hairy but lovable man Anders who runs the local diner and, although seems grumpy, has a soft, tender inside. That's fine. You know what? That's fine. Write a romance. Don't promise a mystery and then do nothing to deliver a satisfying mystery. And just, like I said, was not that complicated. I got mad that didn't have a satisfying mystery, that it didn't even conclude its mystery. But I gave the book credit that it was my fault for assuming that, because the book outright told me, no, don't expect a conclusion to this mystery. This isn't really what it's about. Because I assumed that was a joking thing. But anyways, let's move on. The mystery, it's awful. Briley barely investigates. As I said, she doesn't even really actively go into investigating till well past the halfway point of the book. But even then, even after that decision, she barely does anything to investigate. She speaks to 2 of the suspects on her list, can't decide if they're lying despite having lie detector powers, chances upon a bit of evidence that makes her re-add someone to the list that she had previously eliminated, and eventually decides to set a trap, that which ultimately doesn't end up working. Well, actually, ultimately doesn't even end up being set. So it was kind of a tease, to be completely honest with you. But let's move on. Now, I will give the book some credit. The suspects that we are given at first have interesting motivations. Something that, could work, maybe a bit cliched, a couple of them. There are interesting motivations there. You had Joan, Rose's sister, who was a bigoted woman who could never fully accept that her sister was gay and was a life partner with Gwen. So at that point, Rose had kind of cut her out of her life, but still loved her sister despite that fact. They both still loved each other. So when Rose died and left everything to Gwen upon her death, Joan was incensed, and the motivation that's presented is that she's breaking in to steal bits of Rose back, so she has those sentimental values. No longer caring someone else is already there. A secondary motivation is also set up that she's a bit of a drunk, and maybe her addiction is causing her to steal from her sister's abandoned manor so she can sell stuff off. There you go. 2 interesting motivations for that character. One very sympathetic, one a little less so. Then you had Corbin Scott. a realtor who wants to buy Rose's manor and basically demolish most of the land around it to build up sort of condos so that he can rent out spaces and make a killing. He wants to leave the manor relatively alone because to sell it as sort of a vacation home. However, then it kind of sets up the motivation that maybe Corbin Scott is breaking in and stealing stuff or hiring someone to break in and steal stuff to lower the property value to buy it cheaper and to scare off Briley so he can try to convince Gwen to sell again or wait till she dies and let the bank reclaim it. Because Gwen is very, very kind of old. Doesn't specify how much, but definitely younger than Corbin. Definitely not as young as Corbin is presented to be. So, you got that interesting motivation. And then there's Mike. His motivation, he never really had an interesting motivation. I think at most it says, for the money because he's having some kind of hard time or something like that. I don't know. He was by far the least interesting of the three main suspects that get brought up. Although there was 6 suspects on the list, but I can't get into that. With those suspects set, who do you think the book decides to go with? Which of these interesting motivations does it decide, you know what, this will make our best? It was Carl, the neighbor.
Carl, what did you do?
A character you met maybe 2 or 3 times before he's found out. Okay, so twist villain. It could work with a mystery like this. Leave little breadcrumbs here and there. Someone who's just in the background or someone who occasionally hints that it was them. And it's just twist. Oh my god, it's him. Even if it's not that well built up. An interesting motivation could make this out. Maybe he was in love with Rose and incensed that she was gay and always turned him down. So when she finally died and Gwen abandoned the manor, he couldn't help himself but break in and steal little mementos to bring back. Try to build himself a little altar to her almost. Make it creepy and all that. No, it was money. It wasn't even interesting money. It wasn't like, if I scare her off and she leaves me the house and I can sell it to Corbin, it's, I'm stealing these little odds and ends, the doorknobs, the mantelpiece and all that, to take back to my house so I can put them into my house and sell it at an upraised cost because I'm running out of money because the mill closed and I don't have my pension anymore. It was just incredibly disappointing all around. This ending was not earned, the twist was not earned, and the story even tries to make you feel bad for Carl for the most part, but as a character I barely got to know and clearly had no interest other than his own when he brought it up. When it was revealed to why he was doing it, it was really hard to just feel any sort of sorriness for him. I didn't care that he was low on his luck, that he was stealing so he could repair his house and sell it to Corbin Scott. There was nothing at that. There was nothing hinting at that. There was nothing to make me feel sorry for him. But honestly, the mystery wasn't even the worst part of the book. All that I've said about the mystery, the
23 minutes.
I've spent about this book complaining about the mystery, and it wasn't even the thing that made me hate this book the most. You want to know what really made me hate this book? You want to know what really raised my blood pressure as I read, made me angrily grip the pages and try my hardest not to rip this book in half every time I saw it? Everything. Everything in this book is over-explained or repeated ad nauseum, except the one thing that should be. Briley's powers. Legitimately, there are entire paragraphs in this book, one after another, that just say the same point. It's all the same thing. One paragraph is good. 2 if you really wanted to set it home. That third one, let's ignore the small things. Like the sheer amount of times that this book really feels the need to remind you that Elmer, the Basset Hound, is lazy. No, trust me, you have no idea. But we get things like Briley watches Anders walk away, clearly watching him, in that I hate to see them go, but I love watching them leave kind of way. Get an entire paragraph to her justifying that to herself. And then, the literal next paragraph, Aunt Gwen says, "Hey, you hate seeing him go, but love watching him leave, don't you?" There was no need to do that. Like, a simple, Briley turns back and sees Aunt Gwen smoking would have literally given us the exact same without the repetition and trusting your audience to understand what was being said. Or things like earlier on in the book, where Elmer is described as barking at an intruder. Briley noting, Elmer doesn't bark unless there's an emergency. So there must be an emergency. Cutting back to Elmer barking at at an intruder, and Briley noting, he doesn't normally bark like this. It must be an emergency. Think I'm exaggerating? You think I'm exaggerating here? How many times do you think Briley and Aunt Gwen have the conversation about the fact that Briley has powers as a witch, that Briley is hiding them and suppressing them, not allowing them to flourish, and that Aunt Gwen would like to teach her, and Briley accepts. That's important. Briley accepts. How many times? Feel free to guess down below. Edit it onto your earlier guess about when the mystery started. How many times? 3. 3 times they have the exact same conversation. And it's not a small conversation. Each time it's like at least a page long where, again, they discuss Briley having powers. They discuss that Briley's powers aren't working very well because she's suppressing them because her father told her to suppress them. We find out that Aunt Gwen wants to teach her how to use these powers. But Briley is a bit, I don't know if I want to learn or if I even really believe. Before eventually, Briley agrees either through some blackmail or a deal or just because she actually wants to learn now. 3 times that exact conversation plays. I'm 90% sure that if you cut out every bit of repetitive dialogue, every bit of over-explanation, you would have 100-page less in this book. And for a book that's only 251 pages, that's insulting. Astute viewers may have noticed that, although I don't have as many tabs as I normally do for something like Night Flight or, Last Layover, I do have a considerable amount more of pink tabs in this in comparison to the others. The reason for that is the point I brought up earlier, where I said everything is over-explained except the one thing that needs to be explained. Almost every pink tab in this book is Briley's powers. Every time the book mentions what their limits are, mentions the effects they have, mentions how Briley deals with them, mentions just in general how they work, it changes or gives so little information that it might as well have not been there. For example, Briley's lie detection power. I wish I could tell you how this fucking thing worked. I can't. I legitimately don't know how her lie detection power works. Okay? The most I can tell you is when someone lies to her, she gets itchy. It's stated to just be she gets an itch and she can't help but scratch it. Therefore, the scratching makes it all red and someone notices it. Someone notices, hey, your arm's getting really red. Why is that? And she has to stop herself from scratching it to stop making it red. But then later on, it actually causes an allergic reaction. So when someone lies to her, it's not that it gets itchy. It's the point that it starts to basically give her an allergic reaction that she needs to take Benadryl to deal with it. Is it one or the other? Is the mental itch in her head, or is it actually causing her to break out in hives? It can't be both. Like, if it's mental, Benadryl would do nothing. You would still feel itchy. But if it's an actual allergic reaction, why would you imply so many times that it's purely mental in her head? Or this, just how sensitive are these powers? How fallible are they? That changes way more often. The power is implied to be so super sensitive that obvious sarcasm or even a small little white lie meant to just make someone feel better, that sets her off. She's got a scratch. But it's also implied that if someone's a really good liar, it doesn't set it off. Or it is implied that, if she's not being astute enough, she's not being intuitive enough to this person talking, that won't set it off either. Or maybe sometimes it just fails. It just doesn't pick anything up. Because that happens too. How does it work? You can't keep changing how it works every time you describe it. If the issue was that you couldn't figure out how to write a compelling mystery when our main character could literally walk up to every suspect on the list and say, hey, did you break into my house? And their answer would literally tell her whether or not they did. Take away that power. Because it doesn't even play a point in the mystery solve. At no point does the lie detection power help her solve the mystery. So it is a pointless thing to have. Or if she absolutely has to have it, be creative. Like, let's say Corbin Scott was actually the person breaking in. She walks up to him and says, hey, did you break into my house? My dear Briley, I would never break into the house. And he's telling the truth. Oh, but it's revealed later that he's just been hiring people to break into the house. There you go. He technically told the truth, bypassing her powers, but he was still responsible. Or try this. Maybe you have characters that have some kind of magical protection on them. Maybe, he was given something by Rose in the past. Maybe a couple of these people were given something by Rose in the past or Gwen in the past, that shields them from other witches' powers as a symbol of good faith, or gave someone close to them who then gave it to him. That way you can have Briley not being able to detect anything from them. No sense of emotion, no sense of lie. There you go. Now Briley legitimately has to use her actual brain, as much of one as there is in her head, to determine if he's lying or not. Boom. There you go. 2 solutions. Better than constantly changing how the power works. Or, you know what? How about this? Misdirection. Have a character say, no, I'm not breaking into your house at all. And that picks up as a lie. So Briley begins to think it's them. But they find out that, yeah, they are breaking into the house. But it's completely harmless. Like, he breaks in just to sit in the garden room and think about the time Rose taught him how to grow these things because he misses her so much. There you go. Or Corbin is breaking in because he keeps scoping out the house, making sure that it's still up to date. It can still sell for a lot when he finally gets his hands on it, but he's not actually doing the crime committed. There you go. Misdirection. He's lying, but it's not actually him. Now you have 3 solutions. Sorry for that abrupt addition. I remembered that one, and then I had to add it, even though I told myself I shouldn't. So, but another thing about her powers is that her empathy powers are so underutilized. Again, I question, why is it even in the book? Not only is Briley Scott proven to not be at all empathetic to anyone, she does not understand emotions in the slightest. Is that sympathetic? Anyways, the point is, the empathy powers are never used in a way that tells us something that we wouldn't already know by the narrative of the book. Even in first person, it's so plainly obvious what people are feeling before Briley describes the sense of emotion she gets off them, that it almost feels like an excuse for Millie Thorne to blatantly explain what she wants you to know because she thinks you're stupid. You're not going to understand this very clearly. This character is upset or sad about being here. So I need to give her empathy power so Briley Scott can say, this character's very upset or sad about being here. Other than that, it was just a whole bunch of smaller stuff that started adding up eventually. For example, a lot of the narrative is Briley trying to be hip and cool, but coming off as very out of sync with the times and just kind of cringy. In the same way that it's one of those, it doesn't feel like this is who Briley would be based on her experience. It works when Aunt Gwen does it in the same book because it makes it a point that it is kind of dissonant with who she is. And she even says, I try to keep up with the slang, and it's kind of treated as part of her quirky behavior. It works because it enhances her character. Whereas with Briley, it feels like a pointless addition to try to make her appeal more to an audience. And I'm saying this, by the way, as Briley is literally about my age. So I have a good understanding of what is a little too much. What's the thing like with a page breaks? Or just a badly photoshopped picture of Elmer on them. Which in another book I might even say is charming, but in this one it was just kind of cringy. Because again, it's a badly photoshopped picture of Elmer squeezed down and put in the book. Well, I say badly photoshopped. It's actually probably the best Photoshop in this book, and it's fairly decent. It's a Photoshop picture. The point is, it's not like an art piece that she drew herself. It's nothing like that. There's no charm to it. It's just a picture of a basset hound that's been photoshopped in. Especially because Elmer's not really important to the plot. A lot of what this book promises is important to the plot, it just isn't. Apart from Elmer kind of being an alarm system, and at one point creating false tensions under the idea that he may have been poisoned, Elmer just kind of exists. It's sort of like, if anyone's read the Dresden Files, it's sort of like someone thought Mister was a bigger part of Dresden's life as a detective. So they tried to write a whole book around Dresden and Mister, but Mister never actually changes from what he actually is in the books. So, or another scene. Okay, this one got under my skin a lot because, one, it was brought up twice, but it was Briley tries to be... Millie Thorne tries to make Briley come off as smart and, observant or even but it's smart and observant by pointing out common tropes and how weird they are when applied to real life. But the one trope she chooses to focus on is the one that has an actual explanation. Briley sneaking into her house, which, by the way, another small point there. Briley, upon the first time someone breaks into her house, gets up. Someone's breaking into my house. Let's go, Elmer. Charges in to go get him. Stops. What is it, Elmer? Someone's breaking in? We should leave. And then runs back out of the house, back into a car where she was in the first place. Okay, but back to my point. So, okay. The one thing that Briley seems to focus on is, why do people crouch when they sneak? You know, we've all seen it on games or movies and stuff. When someone's sneaking around, they go into that little crouch position and starts walking. And trust me, Briley has a lot to say about it. Why do we really crouch when we do that? Isn't it just stupid that we do that and that we instinctively do that because we've seen it so much in media, but in reality it's not. It's like, why do we do that? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, for the record, Thorn, there is an actual explanation to why we do that. It's not just something that we randomly decided we do while sneaking. Crouching lowers your vertical profile so that you're harder to spot because now you're scrunched up and moving. It makes you harder to see because now you can hide behind things that are otherwise not as tall as you normally would be, as well as the crouch position making you more aware of your weight distribution and the steps you take, making you move slower and more purposefully. You see? There's an actual explanation. You know how long that took me to find out? 5 minutes. You weren't being clever or witty. You're just coming off as annoying. You're coming off as that person who sees a movie and has to nitpick every little thing, claims that it's a plot hole that a character doesn't act in a specific way. Even though that character not acting in that specific way is how they would act based on the personality setup. This book gets a 3 out of 10.
No, God! No, God, please, no!
Is this book objectively worse than something like Night Flight or The Last Layover? No. Night Flight was a very badly written book all around. It clearly written by the Munsons as an attempt to cash in on the Christian audience by simply saying, this book is Christian, buy it. That's something I learned in my research on the background of the book. And it's not as offensive as The Last Layover, which was a libertarian wet dream appealing to the common fantasy of a libertarian who doesn't clearly understand how the world works. But honestly, reading this book was a lot less enjoyable than something like... Because Night Flight was bad, trust me. There were times where I definitely wanted to pull my hair out in Night Flight. But it was a fun kind of bad. The writing decisions that were made were just so off the wall. What? That at certain points I had to just close the book and laugh. Like, that was so stupid. I had fun reading that one. I had fun writing my script on that one. And I had fun talking about it, as you guys could tell. I acted up my more angry moments. And The Last Layover did make me mad. But that was more of a sense of it offended me more than anything. And the one thing I can say about this book is it doesn't offend me. It's really one of the most inoffensive bad books I've read. Like, legitimately. Even Typhoon Rising was really offensive at points. So it was just annoying to read. The repetition in the book made it just a chore to climb through some of these things. Whereas it just doesn't explain what actually needs to be explained. When the author is explaining a reference that is older than she is, she needs to put down the pen and just assume the audience is going to get it. I legitimately can't tell you anything about Riley Scott's powers, even though this book is para-cozy mystery. The mystery is not only disappointing in its conclusion, but the story itself seems uninterested in telling it, along with exploring any of the paranormal aspects. I really wasn't kidding when I said you could snip out every paranormal aspect of this book, nothing would change. Literally nothing. This book would play out almost the exact same way. The only part of this book that doesn't feel like a lie at the end, in this area, is cozy. I guess that's the one thing you can say about this book. If you're looking for a cozy fiction, I guess this is kind of it. But that doesn't even feel right, because a cozy fiction would just be remove the mystery and remove the paranormal elements altogether. It's just some girl settling in a small town. So the question of whether or not it deserves Mount Doom is very clearly yes. Honestly, I can't recommend anyone read this book. It was just too bad. It wasn't enjoyable to read. It wasn't even, so bad it was good. It fails to do anything interesting with its concept, and by the end of it, it leaves you drained and annoyed. I didn't feel a sense of accomplishment on finishing this book. I didn't really feel anything upon reading this book except slight relief it was finally over. That's not something a book should make you feel. I guess there's just little else I can say about it. Thankfully, with that awful book over, this review filmed, and it burning in the fiery pits of Mount Doom, I can move on to the next thing, to the future, to what lies in front of me on the horizon. Unfortunately, all I can see is mist covering it. But until then, remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even the bad ones.